right, greetings world. Welcome back to the Hip Hop Scholar podcast. I am Melanie, the Hip Hop Scholar, and today's guest, we are honored on our platform to have the distinguished and the ever-inspiring Dr. José Luis Vilson. Brother Jose will say for today's podcast, he is a sociologist, educator, and author based in New York City. He's the executive director and co-founder of Educolor. He's also the author of the best-selling book, This Is Not a Test, a new narrative on race, class, and education, and his writing has been featured in several different outlets, including the New York Times and The Atlantic. He's spoken on race, math, and education for TED and many other national organizations, as well as currently serving on the boards of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards and Power My Learning. In 2025, Brother Jose was also named a New America Fellow. We're excited to talk with him today about hip-hop education and the power of storytelling. So yes, welcome Brother Jose to the platform. We got cheering.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Vilson. Welcome in. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm not nervous at all. This is a new segment for the podcast, and talking all things hip hop. We're both educators, especially in higher education, so it's important that we unpack the value that hip hop brings to identity, the resistance, and everything that the beauty that hip hop brings. Before we get into diving into all the questions, the very first question that I think is formidable and vitally important before we begin: when did you fall in love with hip hop? What was that for you? Was that the breakdancing, the graffiti? Like, what was that substance of hip hop that really brought you in?
Okay. Actually, I know exactly when it was. It was my, and he may not remember this, but my cousin Erickson and another cousin of mine had us in his living room with a bunch of the younger cousins, and they played a Tribe Called Quest. I want to say it was Midnight Marauders, and it was just thinking about that infusion of hip hop and jazz specifically, like hearing those sax solos that really got me like, oh, okay, this is something different. Not to say that I wasn't like already hip hop oriented, because I had already been listening to a whole bunch of stuff when I was growing up, and sure, like I liked a bunch of stuff, but like loving it is a whole different matter. And I think that's where I said, okay, you know what, like there's something here that's speaking to me. So I want to give shout outs to Tribe Called Quest, and of course to my cousin for having played that tape for that for the very first time.
I know that's right, that cassette tape. You remember cassette tapes with trying to put that piece of paper in that box at the top if it didn't come with that flap? You remember those days?
Do I ever? I think I still have some pencils that fit the little tape cassette any old way, so I'm able to
Yeah.
do the little thing. So I'm ready.
Yeah, that's classic. That's vintage type hip hop, which we definitely want to share that to the newer generations,
Right.
and CDs and burning the CDs and all those things. But definitely so. One of the ways that we were able to network was when we saw this post on Instagram with this family that were playing the Far Side in with their musical instruments.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
am a fanatic when it comes to the Far Side. So when I first saw this post, it really evoked such strong emotions to me to see the family not only just playing this song, but giving honor by having the youth play it as well. How important, or what type of feelings did you have when you saw that post as well?
I mean, it kind of reminds me of all the ways that we try to instill legacy into our kids. And it's funny, I know there's been a lot of critiques of different personas, but sampling has been one of the ways that we pass down musical legacies from one to the other. So I recall when I first like got like those liner notes, and I was like, oh, so this song was a sample of that song. So I need to go listen to those songs in order to make sense of what they're trying to do with this song, right? And so when I was watching that video, I was like, oh, so this is a way for folks to like passed down, different, the musicality, the love for music, the traditions. And even if they didn't have necessarily all the words to it, they knew that there was something special about what was happening in that moment. For that 3.5 minute block, right, you got a flavor of history, really, and all the feels and all the ways that like folks are transported into a moment in time when they were listening to that. Of course, like for me, think about that Far Side record. I was, swooped right back into Yo MTV Raps, being in front of like those big box TVs where you only had the 8 channels and you had to like you had to turn the
Yeah.
dial real hard.
Yeah.
That sort of vibe was what that gave me, and I was like, oh, so you're passing this down to the kids because there's no, I mean, it's hard to say, but there's no other real way that they're going to be able to get that because it's not like streaming does the liner notes thing very well. And, for that matter, social media doesn't always like tell you, oh, like this came from this, which is a sample of this. It doesn't do that part very well in the way that liner notes used to do for us. And so for me, I feel like there's like an oral history that happens, right? That audio history, and we get transported back into time, and we get to pass that down onto kids and all that other good stuff. Not to mention, by the way, that like when I started my doctoral study, since you mentioned that earlier, I actually played I Got You Open remix by Black Moon, and I looped that joint so much. I think it's my number one record that I've played ever on like my streaming service. And every time my son like heard it, he know I was studying. So that was the way that I was like, I'm gonna cheat you. I'm gonna teach you this, even if like no one else is gonna teach this for you. Like I need to be the one to teach you. That is my responsibility.
Real talk, real talk. I know for me that Jay Dilla, giving that honor to Jay Dilla being a producer of those beats and being
Yeah.
able to they have honorable mentions now when they talk about producers. You got Mustard and all those different things, but Jay Dilla, with a short-lived life, made such an impact to hip hop and to the music. And it's funny thing when you said that with the Tribe Called Quest, the song, the scenario. My youngest son, he is a person with autism and nonverbal autism, but when that song plays, like he is jumping around, he will replay that song for him, right? And the replay and the loop when it comes to certain music, most especially with hip hop, it just gives that feeling of, perseverance and that
Yeah.
tenacious need to accomplish whatever it is that's in front of you. And it's really inspiring, right? With all the accolades, with all the awards, you are true to, the hip hop scene as well, especially when it comes to identity. So when you think about that, since you've written about race, you've written about class, education, how has hip hop shaped or even influenced your perspective on those issues, whether it's in your classroom, your scholarship, your persona? Like, how has hip hop shaped that for you in your domains?
I mean, it's complicated, right? Because on the one end, I do want to be clear that like there are themes within hip hop that, frankly, like are things that we all need to reckon with within our different communities. I don't think it's any different than any other music genre, but I do think, for example, like the ways that we talk about black women, black trans, black gay folks, like that needs to be remedied. And I think folks in this generation are starting slowly but surely getting better at that, though there's still pockets of whatever have you. And I also think that there are ways and expressions by which like hip hop gave me a language by which to connect not just to like people in my peer group but also generations beyond then. I can't tell you how many times, for example, kids were like, so what happened when like Biggie died, or what happened when Tupac died? Like they knew I was alive for that back then, so they immediately said, oh, I know exactly who to turn to, and that he's going to give me the most accurate story that he remembers from his time, which is a powerful way to be like, yo, like I understand where you're coming from. Like even if you're listening to something that's more updated, like for a lot of my students back, I would say 10, 15 years ago, obviously Drake was just starting, Kendrick Lamar, like he wasn't quite as popping as he is now, but he was still kind of around. You still had the J. Coles and a couple of other rappers like that, and eventually it became about like more, I guess, drill rap or whatever have you.
Right.
Even the futures were still coming on the scene, but even then, like there is this sense that like they were speaking to something that they were trying to understand, and those folks were able to articulate it in a way that, like, my generation wasn't able to articulate to them in the same way, or at least in the, more clear way, as the way like they were listening to. So it was like, all right, cool. So I will find my way through that music to get to you and be like, all right, if I could pull out some themes for you and then pull you perhaps to a different direction, or even to a way that lets you be your best self. I think that's something that, like, hip hop granted to me, is this notion that we need to be able to find ways to sample, find alternate multiple pathways towards the work that we're doing, I continually, like, listen into youth, as opposed to just trying to throw them away because we don't necessarily like the way that they're talking, right? And I think that last one is particularly something that I think every generation starts to feel about themselves. They're like, well, my music is the best music, and I know why, because yada yada. As opposed to saying, no, actually, we have a bridge that we can use to build from here to there. So, like, if Rakim doesn't rap, then Nas doesn't get to be who he is, and then without Nas, then, like, future generations, including like the Kendrick Lamars, don't get to be who they are, right? And similarly, when it comes to our, like, Queen Latifah will always be in my top five, specifically because of the way that she embodied, like, just this aura, right? This, like, presence. It's just like, I belong on the mic as well, on the same tier as the Naughty by Nature's, Redmans of the world. Like, these are my peers. I am not subordinate to what's happening. And so, of course, without, the Queen Latifahs, you don't get the Little Kims, Foxy Browns, you don't get the Nicki Minaj, Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, so on and so forth. And so, all that to say, like, there are ways of thinking about this, and of course, the Jean Greys, and even the folks who I bump regularly. I'm like, oh, so y'all got that authority from folks who already said, like, this, you can do this, the Salt and Peppers of the world, right? Like, it's a really big deal. And so, and of course, like, they also did it for the guys too, because there's a bunch of guys who, like, you can tell, like, their flow comes from that aura, that command, like, you are going to demand this. And so, all that to say, being able to show that to students is also a pretty powerful message as well.
Oh, that well said. I mean, I agree so much, especially being at Sage even. They like, oh,
Hmm.
what happened to Big Papa? What happened to Tupac? And, being able to say, I saw that. I remember that. I was impacted by it. And then, we
Yep.
didn't have social media. So we were relying on Yo MTV Raps and, BET and all the different channels, right? And then word of mouth, word up magazines, it was a much different literacy that was
Yep.
associated when it came to the use of getting hip hop. I also appreciate when you brought in, talking about different genres of music, right? And it all does keep us connected. So when we think about hip hop, it's not just multifaceted of just rap music. There's so many different uh, things that are woven into the perspective of hip hop, which is why it's able to be embraced much, not just the rap, not just the art, but how it can coalesce all the different genres with that. Now, when you brought up Rakim too, Kendrick Lamar, specifically with that, but then also going back, because one of the publications I'm writing right now is looking at cosmopolitanism, starting back from the rap battles with Kumo D and Starsky B Husky, and
Yeah.
how that began the battle rap. I'm a hip hop historian, and thinking about how that
I love
truly
it.
started, that ever powerful use of the words and the rhythm of how, using rap music to build esteem. There's even research that I shared in Senegal, where when you have these refugees and they finally find housing in Australia, when they finally put domicile together, the very first thing they put together is a studio, so that they can give that spoken word and actually
Wow.
put their feelings into words. And that's so important, especially with Queen Latifah. In that era, she gave way to Megan the Stallions and to City Girls and all the different types of varying levels of female rap, but at the same token, still being true to yourself, or whatever that looks like. Being true to yourself. And I think that's definitely what you're saying when you talk with your students, is that not only are you this historian, you also give this opportunity to connect, that you are, not just this person that has these degrees and have this upper level of supposed thinking, but grounded in saying that, I'm there with you. And I hear the lyrics, the same lyrics with you, and we all can have
Yeah.
different interpretations, but also have that same feeling when it comes to all of those rap lyrics. So it's super dope to hear you say that, and make that connection
Amen.
to your scholarship and to what you bring. Now, with
Yep.
that being said, as well, the identity when it comes to hip hop, right? And
Yeah.
in your experience, how does hip hop music, or the influences of hip hop, how does that contribute to the formation or identity of young people today? How do you see young people today using hip hop to form their own identities? And is it similar to how it was back in our days in the late 1900s?
It's different. I think so. Something I keep telling people is that the internet was like did a few things. I think the number one, it definitely democratized it in the way of saying that like it wasn't just accessible for folks who had to go all the way to the Queens or to like inner Harlem or to Brooklyn in order to like get understanding of the flavor or the feel, right? Like there are folks who now just get to watch it over YouTube and they get to learn how other folks did it. And that's one way of thinking about it. But the other way of thinking about it is too, right? Is like you also need the culture underneath the words to make sense of it. It reminds me a lot of like what the creator often says, right? He's like, when you're thinking about when you're listening to somebody, it's like great. They know how to like put the pieces together, they know how to rhyme, but like you don't get the soul underneath it. And without that, like that identity formation becomes lost. And I think that's what hip hop often tried to do, particularly in its so-called golden era, like anywhere between like KRS, Rakim, and company, all the way through like what was happening in the late '90s, even into the early aughts, where people were like, "Oh, like there has to be soul underneath." I mean, whenever you play something like "They Reminisce Over You," oh my gosh, everybody knows exactly what they are, what the feeling is, like how you're supposed to like tune into that. And similarly, there's like a bunch of different songs that are like that, where you're like, oh, I mean, of course, Jay Dilla used to emote through his beats, through the song. Like that's why you could hear a whole like mixtape of his beats, and you're like, oh, so he's trying to tell us something through this thing that he's doing. And so these are just exemplars in the ways that I'm thinking about identity formation. I don't think that folks are doing it in the same way per se, but we do have some really good and valid exceptions. So I think about Zeddy Will, for instance. Like Zeddy Will is a young rap artist who kind of reminds you of like a young Will Smith, where he gets out there and he's just having fun with what he's rhyming with. Yes, like it's in more contemporary rhythms and rhymes, and that's great. And it's like we're taking it back to having fun and like starting from there and then saying, actually, I feel things or I emote things, and here's some things that I want to be able to translate to everybody else. I think that's a powerful way to approach like artistic building, right? And I actually feel that way with even the Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole's, and like you see the growth and the maturation through the music. I think it's like a tide, right? Like at times I felt like, oh, we're just going to be talking about like drugs and medicine, and but then even in that, like there was a level of depression and blues that kind of like harkened back to like very old times, the 30s and 40s, where people were really like going through things and they were trying to reckon with all the ways that the world was not matching their energy, or at least pouring back into them. So there's all these different genres and ways of going about like what we call hip hop, that it almost feels like if I just stick to one lane, then I might miss all the other stuff that we could potentially be doing very much better than the ways that we got our own hip hop, right? We got it through a very filtered way of doing it. It was like, okay, there has to be an authenticity to what you try to do, and you got to meet these bars in order to make it to like the big time or whatever have you. Nowadays is a little bit more democratized, which again has pluses and minuses. But even within that, like I feel like there are folks who now cherish like the Wu-Tang Clan, for instance, who are appreciative of all the ways that people used to rap back then because of that soul and because of that connection. And even when people start, like the City Girls are sampling things from way back when, like when you hear the samples from I forgot who it was sampled too short, and you're like, oh, the reason why she did that was because she wanted to reference back to things that were happening with her own neighborhood because she remembers how it was like growing up then. Great, like go do that because that gives us an exemplar for how we can do things in a whole different way. And of course, it's not necessarily for kids, but it is for something that like once you get to be an adult, you get to replicate because now you're an adult. Go and do that. So it's a mix, but I think it's a healthy mix, and I think you get to choose your flavor for what kind of hip hop you want. And as long as everybody has a good conversation about what it means to like ingest the type of hip hop that you want, then you should be in pretty good shape. Like it's good that we have so many flavors, you know?
Right. Right. That's so well said. When you talk about the different levels, the different flavors, and being respectful to all those, because that's exactly what identity is respecting whatever someone chooses to represent themselves as to the community and our global society altogether. When you were talking too, not only the J. Cole's and Kendrick Lamar, it reminds me, I'm looking at this rap battle with Joey Badass and Ray Vaughn, and they give
Yes.
so much, nods to Slick Rick, who also has a new album coming out. And with,
Yes.
what they say with their wordplay, and they even, Joey Badass has that try freestyle where he has Big Sean and Abdul, and they're three doing,
Yeah.
going off of each other, which was reminiscent too, like the type of videos, music videos like El Segundo or In Your Face that a lot of rappers did back in the day. Onyx as well. It brings the reality that history is repeating itself, but in a very contemporary way, which I think is a good thing, a great thing, where we can have
Yeah.
rap battles and rap beefs. That Kendrick Lamar and Drake, and then you even have Rick Ross and J. Cole, who stepped away from that, thankfully. But at the same token, though, the essence of what hip hop is, it is about showcasing that identity. So with that cosmopolitanism, being able to respect those that are within you and wanting to know more about that, about others that are right next to you, not having to venture off, right? So, I don't have to listen to rap in Africa or rap in Europe. I can listen to the rap in the United States. And for me, I grew up in Louisiana. So to hear Wu
Mm.
Tang and to grow up on those, but also having influences with UGK, seeing the emergence of No Limit Records and Cash Money, all of those influences of identity, and then forming my own. It surprises me when someone can be so one sided, or say, oh yeah, I love rap, yeah, I listen to one artist. They'll name one artist, and it's like, well, it's like autism. And just because you met one person with autism, doesn't mean you know everything there is to do with autism. If you meet one black person with
Yeah.
a degree, oh, I know every black person that has a degree. We all have a story. We all have different things that we had to go through and continue to go through, but also to model. So that modeling in hip hop, whether it be the music or it be the lyrics or it be the showmanship, all of that is vitally important for the generations that are the audience, right? Whether it's our generation or the younger generation, I really appreciate how hip hop can embrace such a big audience, and it doesn't have to be one facet to it as well.
Yep. Actually, and that reminds me too. Shout outs to Ab Soul because his album Herbert. We were just talking recently, just before this recording, about Tiny Desk, and his Tiny Desk is just so good. And so like I do think about that influence of the Tribe Called Quest, the electric relaxation, like that whole vibe, and you're like, oh, so if I could play some of this, then I can get into some Smino, and some Smino gets me to like Kenny Mason and even like Little Sims. Oh my gosh, Little Sims! I don't like the way she raps, Little Sims. I don't know how you put those words together like that. And even with Mariba, I think she does that little sing, and then like she gets into like the bars, and I'm like, okay, so you got like flow just all over the place. Like this is easy for you, or at least that's what, I
Yeah,
like.
yeah,
This is exactly what I'm talking about. Like people can talk about like a very small set, and of course shout outs to like the Pharaoh Monsters of the world, most stuff, so on and so forth. But if your vision of underground rapper just means like you focus on the two or three names that came out from Ruckus Records like in 1999, okay, but like we have such an array of like really dope music coming out, and so oftentimes I'm like, actually, we can so FYI, by the way, in my dissertation notes, I actually shouted out Sky Zoo too, because he really brought back like that old school New York rap, and I had to put that on as I was finishing up my dissertation. I was like, there are very few artists out there who like can just carry me through like a whole thought process as I'm like typing, as he's rapping. I'm like, that's it. Like if I want to like sample things, I'll listen to rap so that I can actually get to writing, and it'll like activate something in the verbal parts of my brain, right? So all that to say, like, shout outs to folks who are like diversifying their listening sections even within this thing we call rap or hip hop.
Yeah, yeah. And something insightful that you just said too is that genre jumping, or that genre, connection. Lil Sims, I first got to know her on Top Boy as an actress on that on
Mm,
Top Boy that's on Netflix, and then to find out that she's a hip hop artist with that, and a phenomenal one at that. That goes back to, like you were saying with Queen Latifah, to seamlessly jump from music into acting. Even Will Smith, LL Cool J. I even talk about Kid and Play, how they were in the Guinness Book of
yeah,
World Record with having, different cinemas, and getting black folk on film, and then bringing in the comedy, having the Martin Lawrences there, bringing in so much that hip hop, the domain of it, just bridges into so many other things, where you can not just be a rapper, you can go into rock, you can go into R&B, you can do so much with it because of the way
yeah,
that wordplay, right? And so that seamless, integration into going to other genres is phenomenal, which is also what we want for our students, and even for people in our global society, is that we want for people to not feel so one-sided. You don't have to be pigeonholed to be one thing. There's so many things that you can be, that the world is creating those jobs for you in the future. And so if you don't feel comfortable with being one thing, then don't be it all. Try to do everything, and then forget all of that and start something new. And I think that's what hip hop does, is that you can abandon, you can go through different types of wordplay, different types of rhythms, different type of styles. You can go, like you had said before, artists like Kendrick Lamar, he can have the hard hitting rap beef battles, but then come with something like Mother I Sober, and then give that
yeah,
lyrical monologue of, therapeutical levels. And that's that's the point of this podcast, is looking at it historically, looking at it presently, and then in the future. I also look into Afrofuturism, which is what can change and what it could be and what it should be, by the imagination. Chat GPT just could never. When you said that you're putting in that music for your dissertation, that's far more powerful than putting a prompt in the Chat GPT. And I want for people to really
yeah.
understand that piece, is that, Chat GPT is great. Generative AI is wonderful. It has its place, but there's nothing that really can spark the imagination and give that, that authenticity, that, hip hop can bring for the person to build their own level of authenticity.
Yeah, that's all facts. That's all facts. Yeah, like I guess for me, like what all you made me think about is the ways that people have consistently thought about other people like doing their voice stylings over chat. Like you even see I guess the argument over on Instagram about Timbaland putting out AI artists, and how many people just feel like, okay, but there's this humanity that you lose out on when you do that sort of thing. Like imagine if, and I think that's also some of the beef with some of our more contemporary rap artists, where they don't grow, they just stay within that same pocket. And all the while, like some of my favorite artists, they continually show like growth or evolution in some sort of way, and chat can't do that. ChatGPT is just like an amount, an amalgamation of all the things that I've ever been done before. So it's never going to take you forward because it's always going to be stuck in the past as a result. So when we think about the ways that hip hop has operated, like in a very futuristic way, it's say, okay, I'm going to respect the past and push you into the future by doing so. Like that's a whole different like thought process when you're doing that sort of like authentic hip hop work. And so for me, that's I'm always like, okay, so what's gonna be that next thing? I remember when Umi Says came out by Mos Def. You're like, I don't know what this is, but I feel like you're taking me somewhere, and that somewhere just happens to be in the future where you have this guy who like he just has bars, right? And then but his vocal intonations, he can sing all day and we'll be like, "Oh, okay, so you're taking this somewhere new and this is lovely." And like I feel like Mos Def did a thing there with Umi Says that says, "All right, people, you are free to like go be soulful in a whole new, a whole new way." Similarly with like Andre 3000 when like he came out with The Love Below, and like he always talks about how he doesn't want to do rap just to be rapidly. Like he you can do that all day, but he wants to take you into like the next thing or the next evolution of the thing. So I feel like there's a bunch of different art, even like Meg Thee Stallion. People kind of like miss that, but beyond the appearances and the things that she often does, there are things that she was doing lyrically and like musically where you're like, oh, so she's putting a lot of respect on people from the past in order to take us to a whole new future. Like before, like so Kendrick basically got the blueprint for this beef from her. Like
Yeah.
that's pretty straightforward. And she's like, listen, I'll give you a few keys here and you can handle the rest. And so he ends up doing that, and that's what we have right now, right? And
Hmm.
so like I feel this the same way about any number of artists where they're like, I'm gonna give you a way to do this that doesn't have to involve violence per se, and I can keep it all on wax, and it's gonna be super duper dope for you any old way, which is something that like that's what we do. Like that's hip hop as well. Like being able to hash it out, battle it out, but also take people into a new way of doing things and pushing us away from perhaps like fixed or like old methodologies that didn't really serve us in the ways that they ought to. So that.
Right. That part. I mean, that griot tradition of storytelling and learning through the stories and with the rhythms and with the spoken word, all of that is, timeless and still needed in today because, my fear is that, with social media and what I do see sometimes is that people go by what someone else has said. They don't take the time to hear it
Yeah.
themselves. They'll think that, oh, okay, well, if this group of people or if this has this number of views, then it's good or it's bad. And they'll base it off of that experience instead of creating their own. And when you do have, opportunities to, like for Kendrick Lamar in the Super Bowl, he had the Super Bowl halftime show, and he did so at such a turn of the century. With things being as changing as they have, you know, he came with such a perspective for that really no other artist. People wanted Lil Wayne to do it, and as much as I am a Lil Wayne fan to it, he could not have done what Kendrick Lamar was able to create and do. And he faced
You're correct.
much criticism, but the streams and the fans and the concerts, they're speaking for themselves. Where you can't go with this cancel culture or go with this, these bots that are making it where you have this negativity for someone that's really trying to show you that you can be. It's okay. Like, when Umi Says, I mean, there's no way that you cannot be emotional listening to that song. Like it is 0% way for you to just listen to that song and just be unchanged by it. Like that is one of those songs that evokes such an impact and an energy in such a positive way. And that's where, whether you have that positive way, then you have that trap music, which also puts you in a mind frame of determinants and, dominance as well, depending on where you are. And, honoring those, being able to seamlessly go to conscious rap, to gangster rap, to trill rap, wherever you're from and wherever you accept. Because, growing up for me, in the South, how do you know Wu Tang or what is this Far Side? And it's like, why do you not know it? And just because I love this music, and Far Side, just that's like my number one. Anybody knows me, they know that Lab Cabin California is my favorite of all time. I
Whew.
had the cassette tape. Even that song Pork. They had a single called Pork that was on the B side of a cassette
Wow.
tape when I bought it back in the day. And but that it was a West Coast group, but I grew up in the South. So being able to be influenced by that and having these influences to create your one identity, that's the whole goal of education, is to take all of this information, synthesize it, and make something new. That's what we want for our students. That's what we want for ourselves, is to have this information and synthesize it into something new. So let me ask you this question as well, Brother Jose.
Yeah.
um so, are there challenges or misconceptions that you've encountered anytime that you may bring up hip hop, or like you said with your dissertation? Did you get any type of, like a wall or any backlash, and how could someone address that as well? Like, we have educators who may be rapping in the class, but we are talking about the essence of that identity building and framing. What is some key things that you can say, especially if you've had any challenges or misconceptions yourself?
I mean, the number one thing for me is that if you can rap, then you should go ahead and do so. Like, then that's the thing about growing up in our era, is that if you can do it, great. I would like to see your product. Like, I want to hear your product. I want to be able to see how you get immersed in it, so on and so forth. But if you can't rap, and you're just trying it for some reason so it looks like it connects with the kids, that never works for me. Like, there are folks who just want to say, you get to sample the culture because it's open up. No, there are standards
Right.
that some of us have grown up with, which is, it's almost unfair, because like, if you listen to even like, one CD of Redman and you're like, oh, like, I can't do that, you're right, you can't do that, because he's worked on that for like hours and days and months and years, right? There are ways of thinking about that I would hope that other folks would abide by. Like, there's a level of standard that we kind of hold these folks up to. And so the art, that's just the way it is. I mean, it's part of the culture. And if you can rap, then I more than welcome it. And if you could do it in the classroom in front of kids, even more so. And it's funny because there are times when I have found myself like doing just like a smidgen of rap, or like even sampling something, be like, oh, I caught that. That was Tupac. It's like, oh, I did that. Okay, great. Sampling is fine, but it has to come from an authentic place. Is really more than anything. It has to come from a place where you aren't just doing it for like a performance of sorts, but you're doing it because you genuinely care, and like it seems like it's part of something that you would already be doing, and or that you so deeply respect it that you're willing to put yourself out there as showing that you are a fan of the thing, right? Which is often, for example, some of the conversations I get into when it comes to like like an Eminem or like a Mac Miller, like folks who are within rap know that they can rap, right?
Right.
But they don't rap like they're rap GPT, like they have shown time and again that they deeply respect the art, no matter how imperfectly, of course. But there's a way of saying like, I know how to respect the art because I have studied this and I am doing the work to make sure I know how to do this thing. There are other folks who just hop in and say, well, I watched a YouTube video on it and I was able to mimic this such a person, so I get to be. And you can hear it too. You're like, that don't sound right. That sounds like you kind of just did this because it was gonna make you money. And sure, it made some people money. Did I make a ton of people money who try to do it that way? But I wish them well. And I think that's something that I often try to talk about with folks, is like, there is a level of authenticity that has to come with this work, because there are those of us who've been around for long enough where we're like, yeah, if it don't sound right, it's not gonna have longevity. It'll be cute with the kids for like a minute, maybe like a song or two, but it ain't gonna go further than that. Those of us who are still loyal to like like a Wu Tang, or even like to, I mean, name them. Like, some of us are loyal fans of JJ Fad. Like, we knew what they did for the culture, and we will stick around. Like, you put a JJ Fad joint out, we're gonna dance. We're gonna be supersonic. Like, we got that part right. Like, we'll do the
Right.
WAP. Not everybody got that, and so I think that's something that we're always gonna be attentive to, is like, who's going to steward the culture, who's gonna steward the art. And I'm not trying to put guardrails per se, but there are folks who are like, yes, like we need to like tend to this so that it doesn't go the way of rock and roll. It doesn't go the way of like even jazz that became flat over all of a sudden because people went from Thelonious Monk to, well, I won't name drop, but some artists that like play their sax flat or like it's like, oh,
Right.
it doesn't jive with me, right? So yes, the level of authenticity really matters, and showing that you actually study the art really matters as well. Even if you're trying to imitate it at first, and then you find your own flow within, great, go do that. But that's a challenge.
It is. Two things popped up while you were speaking. That authenticity, when they introduced breakdancing into the Olympics, and you had the
Yeah,
break dancers and that one particular one from Australia, it was like, what are you doing? You had
yeah,
so many great people, and it's exactly what you said. Being a part of something, conducting your research, being immersed in it instead of doing this shallow, facade and embarrassing yourself. You're not a
yeah.
part of that. And it was so embarrassing, and I just hated to see that, especially on a world stage like the Olympics. It's
And the
embarrassing
world's
and it
great.
lacks authenticity. And the second thing that I was thinking about in your bio, you talked about how you learned Spanish, right? You learn
Yeah,
Spanish and you learn these languages, and that's not being able to look at a YouTube video. That's the example that hip hop brings, is that for all cultures, race, gender, whatever you identify as, you can then amalgamate yourself into other types of things. So learning Spanish was one of those for you, so that you can be a part of that culture and learn about that piece. But you have to get honor to it by diving deep into understanding, the pieces and the syntax when it comes to learning Spanish, and then any other language or any other genre. And that was just, two examples that when you were given that insight, it was like, well, yeah, if you don't have that authenticity, if you don't have that drive to ask a question for clarity, or even wanting to, it just lacks purpose. And it never resonates with students. It doesn't resonate with self and others. It's a
yeah.
it's a hard challenge to be able to enjoy the human experience when you lack that humanism to go into the experience. So I absolutely agree with you there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the bridge actually, and thank you for pointing that out, is that kids can smell when you're fake generally. Like 9 out of 10 kids can smell when you don't care about them. And I keep telling people everywhere I go, I'm like, maybe they may not be able to read at the level that you want them to read, but they can read you. Like they can tell who you are. They know how feel about them, so on and so forth. And even like people talk about warm demanders, like yeah, like there's a difference between there could be two teachers doing the same exact thing to them, and they could be scolding both sides, right? But one of them, the kids will respond to better, specifically because they know that that teacher cares about them a lot and has shown them time and again how deeply they are willing to work for them, while the other one is just reprimanding and punishing and not showing them any ounce of real, genuine human care. And so, like, those are things that we came to understand. And I think that's also like just underneath this conversation about hip hop, because it goes right back to like understanding there's a feeling. And even you think, oh, well, I'm just listening to this with my ears. Yeah, like you got five senses, six senses. Great. Like those six senses, and by the way, six senses, y'all know what I mean. Anyway,
Yeah.
if you're hip hop, you know what it is. Like that's one of them. That's one of the ways that we receive people. And so somebody can tell whether or not you're being fake using their ears, then obviously like hip hop has to be a way where people actually get to feel you through the record, right? And so like you have to be just that good in order to make that happen. If they can't feel you through the record, then what are you doing?
That's what are you doing? That's right. Is it just the numbers? Is it just the views? Because even Tyler, the creator, he'll say, don't you're not doing it for the numbers. Do it for yourself. If
Yep.
you have music, dope music that you like, then you won. And that's the
Yeah.
goal, is being satisfied with your product and the effort that you've placed in putting that together. So
Amen.
that's absolutely true. So, with that being said, I have one more question for you, and then we're going to end up finishing up our podcast for today. But how do you envision the future of hip hop and education? how do you see it evolving over the next decade? Do you think we should have, because in my studies, I want hip hop to be as, a something to study and to rear scholarship as much as we have, students looking at Shakespeare and looking at all these, different texts that are mandatory, hip hop, and looking at the essence of the griot tradition, the graffiti, the breakdancing, what do you envision in the future of hip hop within the next 10 years and beyond?
I mean, the first part is, obviously we want to shout out folks who are already doing the work, folks including like some of my faves from Hip Hop Ed who have consistently like elevated this message through the digital channels like this one where, we're getting to have conversations about the intersections of scholarship and hip hop, and that's really, really dope because the more we promote it, the more, legit it becomes because that's the way we institutionalize this work. It's important then to also study the ways that, and I think that there have been some people who started to document it, but really the way that hip hop has been infused into all sorts of culture. Like there is not one artist out there who hasn't done one set of sample of hip hop in one way, shape, or form. Like name them, and it's like somebody's doing like the skippity skip bounce within like their own singing, or like they're using trill beats, or they're using drill beats, or like they want that like feature from this latest rapper, so on and so forth, or even they use that same producer and like they'll borrow the drums, they'll borrow like the sample. Like we see you, and so
Right.
like these are the ways that folks can start documenting and be like, actually, we moved whole culture, and there is still like a set of people who said, all right, great, like y'all can keep being influenced by us, but don't forget us. So we get to still be the standard bearers for that which makes hip hop, right? Even if you are all influenced by that which we are doing, and that's a really important like tension there. And I think in the next 10 years, when it comes to education specifically, I would love for like more folks to see how, for example, DJing is just another form of like mathematics, applied math, right? Being able to listen to the fourth beat, eighth beat, so on and so forth. Similarly with breakdancing, like there's so many places where we are losing arts and losing dance specifically, and so we can start bringing some of that in, along with the Alvin Ailey's and so on and so forth. And of course, like there are music programs that could benefit from saying, you know what, if you want to bring in the ways that you're thinking about music, then bring that in, and we'll try to help that out through the things and the mechanisms that we have, right? So
Right.
there is a way to do it, which I think can still be authentic and true to what students want to create and develop. And it doesn't have to be like, we need to make sure that every kid gets math, English, science, and social studies. When for me, it's like the base can be math and English, and all the applied ways that we approach these things can be through hip hop. For instance, if we have folks who are truly dedicated to that craft, then I think we could do much better for all of our students. And by the way, like this is not just like, and yes, unapologetically for Black folks, yes, and Latin folks who are like part of the culture, yes, and I think if we allow for white folks to say, you know what, like even though I can't be part of the culture, I'm going to go ahead and appreciate it and get somebody in who can do this sort of work for us, then I think that's we're all the better for it. And again, as it comes from an authentic place, that's harder to judge, but it's got to be done because the kids are talking. Like we're going to get an education even if the systems aren't working for us. We can just call that out straight up, but
Right.
so we have a choice. Either we can pull that into the schools, or we can keep our schools boring and leave that stuff out of the schools. But I prefer we have the hip hop be in the schools so that we can make the schools less boring, and the learning and the education can actually have a synergistic relationship. And that's a really powerful thing for us to think about.
That's right. That's right. That's the best thing ever to say, and to have a decree for a better education for our future students and for our educators, and finding those ways to be able to do so. Because there's too many classrooms where you have people trying to teach math that have no math basis to it. People trying to teach different things, and they lack that that fire that's needed to teach in today's classrooms. We have students that have a desire to learn, But we know how policy is. We know how challenging
Yeah.
it is to be in the classroom. But you still can't lose that why. You can't lose that fire and desire to want to instruct the next generation, regardless of the external factors. There's so many tools to our domain, but we could use that by having opportunities of authenticity that hip hop definitely showcases. So, I really appreciate that. I appreciate the time that you've given us today here at the Hip Hop Scholar Podcast. You are
Of
more than
course.
welcome to come back again whenever you have the time, dear sir.
I
And,
appreciate it.
thank you so much again. All right.
That means a lot, Melanie. Thank you so much for having me, and shout out to everybody listening.
Yes, sir. All right. Y'all take care. Indeed.